This isn't just a story about how I vanished. It's about how the woman who shredded my world became the one who led me back from the brink. You might think you know betrayal, but trust me, what I'm about to reveal will challenge everything you believe about broken hearts. The platinum band didn't sink. I stood on the rickety old pier for an eternity, watching it mock me. It just floated, a glinting, defiant circle caught in the late afternoon sun, dancing on the water's surface as if tethered by an invisible string. I wanted it to disappear, to drown, to be swallowed by the cool depths just like I felt I had been. But it merely circled, a silent, taunting sentinel. My memory of reaching that pier is a blur of searing heat in a screaming void in my chest. I recall the tremors in my fingers as I slid the ring off. Our ring, the one Maya had promised to wear, even if the world burned. Turns out, the world didn't need to burn. My own simply imploded. There was no dramatic splash when I finally threw it, just an echoing, terrible silence. Life continued around me, oblivious. Tourists snapped photos of gulls. Children licked melting ice cream. Couples laughed as if existence held some universal sense. No one seemed to notice a man in his late 30s, Milo Thorne, unraveling in slow motion, a metallic tang of guilt and unspeakable knowledge searing his throat. Ready to confront a truth so ugly you'll question all your past assumptions? You won't believe what I found on her encrypted cloud drive. I certainly didn't. It wasn't just a handful of incriminating texts. It was a meticulously organized digital archive. Photos, videos, even whispered voice notes. She hadn't merely strayed, she had curated her infidelity, cataloged every stolen moment, smiling in every frame. And the ultimate punch to the gut? The other man, the stranger, was wearing my clothes, my favorite faded hoodie, the crimson Christmas sweater she'd always claimed to despise. Apparently, she loved the sweater, just not on me. I didn't scream. I didn't smash anything. I didn't allow a single tear to fall in front of her. Instead, I simply powered down, like a switch had been flipped, disconnecting me from reality. Maya Croft, with her striking auburn hair and deceptive smile, assumed I was heading to the gas station for snacks. But I left my wallet on the kitchen counter, my phone on the stairs, my car keys chilling in the freezer. It was all deliberate. I wanted her to believe I'd lost my mind. In hindsight, I probably had. That first night, the grimy comfort of a train station bench was my sanctuary. The second, the cramped back seat of a rental car I had no intention of ever returning. I invented a new name, Elias Vance, before I even thought to change my socks. Closure wasn't what I craved. It was absolute, undeniable distance. But here's what no one tells you about vanishing. It doesn't matter how far you run if the person who broke you still holds the map to your soul. I convinced myself I was safe in Oak Haven, a nondescript dot on the map where the annual antique tractor parade was the town's peak excitement, and half the shops still shuttered on Sundays. I found a cramped attic apartment above a hardware store run by a gruff, silver-haired man named Silas Finch. He asked only one question during the lease signing. Running from something or someone? I met his gaze, my gaunt face hidden by a newly grown beard, and replied, "Yes." He simply nodded as if it were the most natural answer in the world. No ID check, no deposit, just keys and a profound, comforting silence. For 10 months, that attic was my tomb. My days were a slow, quiet rhythm of stacking shelves, mixing paint, trying desperately not to exist too loudly. I survived on stale gas station sandwiches and scrawled terrible poetry on old receipts. I spoke to no one unless absolutely necessary. I was at last truly invisible. And then the knocking began. At first I ignored it. No one ever came to the third floor. Silas was too lazy to climb those creaking stairs, and everyone else assumed it was just storage. But the rhythmic thudding persisted. It came again the next morning, then again that night. Soft at first, then growing louder, slower, more deliberate. I didn't open the door, I barely breathed. I just pressed my ear to the cold wood, my heart hammering, convinced the past had finally grown legs and learned how to knock. What if everything you've escaped still finds a way to haunt you? 2 days later, the knocking ceased. In its place, a single folded note slid under the door. One line scrawled in the handwriting I knew better than my own. I know you're in there. I don't need the door. I'll wait. I should have run. I should have packed the scant belongings I had and disappeared all over again. But I froze. And in that terrifying stillness, my carefully constructed world began to fracture. She didn't knock again. Instead, I started finding little things. A coffee cup from the cafe we used to frequent, placed carefully on my doorstep. A faded Polaroid of my old backyard taped to my window. A worn copy of The Wind in the Willows, my childhood favorite, left at the base of my door. Inside, her elegant script read, "You still disappear like mole." How could she have found me? I'd changed everything. My name, my face. I'd shaved my beard, dyed my short brown hair a darker shade. I had meticulously erased Elias Vance. Yet she had carved her way back in, insidious as ivy through brick. And then came the most unexpected turn. She didn't arrive seeking forgiveness. She arrived seeking to explain. No dramatic midnight pounding, no sobbing confessions in the rain. She appeared on a mundane Monday morning, in broad daylight, wearing oversized sunglasses that obscured half her striking face, holding a grocery bag as if stopping by to drop off soup to an old friend. I watched through a crack in the blinds, my breath caught in my throat like a stone. I hadn't uttered Maya's name in nearly a year, but there she was, alive, casually present, undeniably real. For a fleeting second, I genuinely believed I was hallucinating, my mind playing one final cruel joke. She didn't look broken. She looked energized. Her auburn hair was longer, darker, her skin tanned as if she'd spent the last 12 months somewhere bright and warm. I had conjured images of her suffering, crumbling, drowning in regret. Instead, she looked like someone returning from a sun-drenched vacation in a version of life I had never been invited to. I didn't open the door, but her voice drifted through the wood, calm, unshaken. "I brought you something, Elias," she said, using my new name with unnerving ease. "It's not what you think." I wanted to unleash a torrent of rage, to scream that I wanted none of her things, none of her voice, none of her shadow moving across my floor. But I just stood there, silent, listening. She left the bag. I waited a full hour before daring to open it. Inside, I found a tattered manila envelope and a single, perfectly ripe orange. I stared at the fruit for what felt like an eternity. I hadn't eaten an orange since the night I discovered her digital archive. The mere scent made my eyes sting. The envelope was worse. Inside were dozens of printed emails, pages upon pages of cold digital ink. Conversations between her and someone named C. Not Elliot, not the man from the bookstore. This was someone else entirely. Someone older, married, a name I didn't recognize until I read the line. "I know you said you wanted to leave him, but be smart about it. Get what you can first." The date? 3 months before I left. My knees buckled. This wasn't a love affair. This was a transaction, a carefully orchestrated scheme. And I, Milo Thorne, was the unwitting mark holding the receipt. This is what no one tells you about betrayal. It can go far deeper than the heart. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the edge of my creaking bed, staring at that orange as if it held the answers. The envelope lay open beside it, its contents scattered like skeletal remains across the floor. Every email was more sickening than the last, not just for what they revealed, but for the casual, almost indifferent tone she maintained throughout. As if I wasn't real, as if I were merely a character she was preparing to write out of a script she'd never truly believed in from the start. The man she was corresponding with, Caleb Cross, was neither young nor charming. Based on his tone, he was cold, calculating, a spreadsheet in human form. The emails detailed things I hadn't even realized were gone. My life insurance policy, the true value of our shared house, a second storage unit I never knew she rented. There was even mention of my old retirement account from my very first job, one I'd completely forgotten existed. She hadn't just emotionally betrayed me, she had meticulously planned to financially erase me. I left the apartment at sunrise, my legs feeling mechanical, as if grief had grown bored and handed control to autopilot. I walked with no destination, only motion. Eventually, I found myself back at the pier. The ring was gone now, finally. Perhaps someone had found it. Perhaps it had finally succumbed to the depths. I didn't care. All I saw was the indifferent water, just as I had left it. I stayed out all day. When I returned, something new awaited me on my doorstep. A small, plain box. No note, just a cassette tape. An actual tape. Who even used those anymore? I almost threw it out, but curiosity, I've learned, is poison wrapped in paper. Silas still had an ancient cassette player in the back of his shop. I asked to borrow it. He didn't ask why, just handed it over with a grunt and a peculiar look. Back in my attic room, I sat cross-legged on the floor and pressed play. Static. Then her voice. Not as I remembered. Not the calm, collected tone from outside my door. This was younger, shakier. She was crying. If anything happens to me, this is why. He promised me everything. He said he'd make it clean. I didn't know what he meant until it was too late. I paused the tape, my mind reeling. Who was she talking about? What did she think was going to happen? What precisely had I run from? And what, terrifyingly, was now coming back? I played the tape 3 more times that night, not out of confusion, but because I was desperate not to miss a single, telling breath. Her voice cracked in places I'd never heard before. Not during our most vicious arguments, not when I told her I was leaving, not even in the messages she left after I disappeared. This wasn't guilt. This was raw, bone-deep fear. At the very end of the tape, a long, dragging silence, then a whisper. I had to crank the volume to its maximum to catch it. Tell him about the house. He'll know which one. But I didn't know. That was the central, agonizing problem. I sat in that cramped attic room, surrounded by the receipts of my own ignorance. Too exhausted to cry, too bitter to scream. What house? Where? When? I was on the verge of giving up, of tossing the tape across the room and dismissing it all as some elaborate, dramatic performance designed to twist the knife deeper. Then I noticed something. Tucked between the emails in the envelope was a photograph I hadn't seen before. Black and white, faded, depicting a small brick house with ivy climbing its left wall and a crooked porch swing that looked eternally still. On the back, in her familiar handwriting, were 5 simple words. You were always right here. I don't know why, but I knew. That house was in Millstone, a small town 2 hours away. I remembered passing it once during a road trip in our 3rd year of marriage. I had joked that it looked like a haunted postcard. She had laughed too hard, then abruptly changed the subject. We never spoke of it again. Until now. I should have walked away, thrown the photo into the nearest river, and locked the past away forever. But something within me, a sick, shaky piece that still yearned for understanding, propelled me into my rental car before I even packed a bag. Millstone was quiet, colder than I remembered. The streets were eerily empty, the kind of place where time slows down, not from peace but from pure, utter forgottenness. And there it was, the house, still standing, still crooked, still waiting. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the air hung heavy with the scent of dust and ancient fabric, as if it knew I didn't belong. On the kitchen table, another envelope. No name, no address, just one word scrawled in urgent red ink. Run. I didn't run. Stop. Before you read another word, consider what you'd do if your reality shattered. Every instinct screamed at me to flee. But when you've spent so long numb, so long hiding from everything, including yourself, fear can feel almost comforting. At least it proves something is still real. So I sat in that crooked kitchen, staring at the word run. The ink was slightly smeared, as if written in haste or with trembling hands. There was no electricity in the house, no humming fridge, no warm pipes, no distant click of a thermostat. Just the occasional groan of old wood shifting in the silence. I moved from room to room as if in a forgotten dream. Every floorboard betrayed my presence with a creak. Upstairs, the bedrooms were empty, marked only by faint dust outlines where furniture once stood. One closet door bore yellowed children's drawings taped inside, shaky stick figures, crudely drawn hearts. But it was the basement door that stopped me. It stood ajar, revealing a darkness deeper than the rest of the house. A metallic, damp smell wafted up from below, like rust and rainwater. For a long time, I just stood there, one hand pressed against the wall, trying to convince myself I didn't need to know what lay beneath. And then I heard it, a faint but definite noise. Something shifted in the depths. I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, an old broom with a cracked handle, and descended the groaning stairs. Halfway down, my foot slipped on something soft. A pile of cloth. No. Shirts. Men's shirts. Neatly folded, all the same size. At the bottom of the stairs, a wooden table, scratched and scarred. A single chair pulled out slightly, as if someone had left in a hurry. On the table, a plain black box, dustless. Inside, a stack of Polaroids. And in every single one of them, me. Different angles, different days. Some from before I left Maya, some after. One even showed me at the pier, the exact moment I threw the ring. My hands trembled and I dropped the photos, scattering them across the concrete floor. Behind me, a voice, familiar, yet chillingly detached, spoke. You were supposed to disappear, Elias, not start digging. I didn't turn around immediately. Something about the voice locked my spine. Not because I fully recognized it, but because it was almost familiar, like a tune I could hum but couldn't place. I stood frozen, staring at the Polaroids. My own face stared back at me from different corners of my life, some moments I didn't even remember living. I picked one up, my fingers shaking. It showed me asleep on a bus, my head pressed against the window, sunlight cutting across my cheek. That trip was 3 towns ago. I'd had no phone, no ID. I'd paid cash for everything. How had someone followed me? The voice spoke again, closer now. You were never supposed to go back to the house. That was her mistake. I finally turned. He wasn't what I expected. Caleb Cross was middle-aged with neatly trimmed graying hair and a calm demeanor, like someone's uncle who worked in logistics. He wore a simple windbreaker and held nothing overtly threatening, just a phone in one hand and a leather-bound notebook in the other. His expression wasn't angry. It was disappointed, as if I had failed a test I didn't even know I was taking. I managed to stammer, Who are you? But the words felt clumsy, my mouth unused to forming them. He stepped forward slowly, carefully avoiding the scattered photos on the floor as if they were sacred. You think this is about infidelity? About some woman who broke your heart and made you vanish? No, this was about control, Elias. You were the easiest variable, the one who would run. None of it made sense. I backed up against the damp concrete wall, the old broom still clutched in my fist like a child's toy sword. You're not the first, he continued, his voice disturbingly even. You're just the first who came back. The others followed instructions. They vanished and stayed gone. You left breadcrumbs. I couldn't breathe. The others? He tossed the leather notebook onto the wooden table. Read it or don't. But if you leave this house alive, you don't come back again. Not here, not to Maya, not to anything that existed before. You've seen enough. That's the only warning you'll get. Then, as casually as he'd appeared, he walked past me, up the groaning stairs and out the front door, as if this was just another Monday on his calendar. I stood there for a long time, the notebook untouched, the smell of damp earth tightening around me like a noose. I knew that if I opened it, nothing about my life would ever make sense again. But I opened it anyway. And what I found inside made me realize this nightmare hadn't started with Maya. It had started with me. The notebook wasn't long, just 13 pages, but each one cracked my understanding of my own life wide open. It wasn't a diary or a confession. It was a log, a cold, clinical breakdown of every major decision I'd made in the past 5 years. What I said, what I didn't, what I should have done, who was monitoring me, where I went when I thought I was alone. Some entries included precise timestamps, others chilling psychological reflections. But one sentence repeated again and again, etched into the margins like a dire warning. He is perfect for dissociation. I wasn't supposed to find that house. I wasn't supposed to hear the tape. And I definitely wasn't supposed to stay alive long enough to read that notebook. My entire breakdown, my carefully orchestrated disappearance, had been designed, engineered, and I, Mila Thorne, had walked right into it. But here's the twist they didn't plan for. Maya didn't betray me, at least not in the way I thought. Her affair, the emails, even the photos, they were planted. Real events, yes, but manipulated to serve a deeper, darker purpose. Her tears on that cassette tape were genuine. She had tried to get out. The house in Millston wasn't a trap for me. It was where she left the only truth she had, hoping I would be the one to find it. She had been terrified because she realized too late what she'd been pulled into, and I was the only person she believed might still care enough to uncover it. My hands were trembling as I realized the true horror. I never saw Caleb Cross, the man in the windbreaker, again. I left the house that night and drove until the sunrise burned the last vestiges of fear from my chest. I tossed the notebook into a river 3 towns over. I didn't want it anymore. I didn't need proof. I needed peace. 2 months later, I moved west. I live by the coast now, teaching kids how to build kites that soar high above the waves. No one knows my old name, not the one Maya used to whisper, nor the one scrawled in that chilling notebook. Just me, a man who vanished and, against all odds, learned how to breathe again. The past still knocks sometimes, quietly, faintly, but I don't answer anymore. I exist now, fully, messily, honestly, and that's more than I ever thought I'd have.